So we'll have another 2 minutes, Dr. David, if you allow me just to start. Just 2 minutes. If there is some
Uh,
technical issues with our attendees, with our colleagues. So we'll have another 2 minutes and we will start immediately. Thank you.
by all means.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Saudi Patient Safety Center webinar series. My name is Anas Amr from the Saudi Patient Safety Center, and I will be your moderator for this fantastic session. As you know, in the healthcare system, we often say that to err is a human, but for those of us in quality and patient safety, the real challenge is not just acknowledging error, it's managing the complex behavior that lead to it. We are not just looking for fewer incidents, we are looking for a system that is fundamentally safer by design. Tonight, we are privileged to be joined by an expert and pioneer in this field who revolutionized how we think about this balance. Dr. David Marks, the president and founder of the Just Culture Company, and the pioneer behind the Just Culture framework that has become a gold standard in aviation, power generation, and the healthcare worldwide. He is a former Boeing engineer and awarded the winning safety leader and has served as a senior advisor to NASA. He has spent his career teaching us and other colleagues that we cannot punish our way to safety, but we certainly can manage our way there by focusing on a few critical behaviors. So our session tonight that is titled Achieving Measurable Patient Safety Gains, how the management of a few key behaviors can produce dramatically improved results. Dr. Marks will show us how focusing on a specific behavioral management can produce dramatic bottom line results in patient outcome. Welcome with me, Dr. David Marks, and the floor is yours, Dr. David. Thank you.
Dr. Anas, thank you so much. That was very kind words. And thank you everyone who is on the call for taking time in the evening to listen to and participate in this presentation. Hiba Jabarte, thank you for putting this together from the Patient Safety Center side. Two of my colleagues, David Watson and Samila Dutra, have joined me on the call, and they'll be watching and monitoring the chat, as will Dr. Anas as the moderator. So as we go through this, the title, Achieving Measurable Patient Safety Gains, how the management of a few key behaviors can produce dramatically improved results. That's where we're going to head. All right, let me see if my slides will work. So just a little bit about me. This is me on the right-hand side. This last summer, I transitioned from living in South Florida around the Miami area out to where I grew up, which is Phoenix, Arizona, and the desert of Phoenix. And I had to find new healthcare providers. So I quickly found a primary care provider, went into that primary care provider and said, look, here is my body, here is me, here's what I want to do. I want to get another 20 years out of this body. I am 64 years old. So I thought, well, look, if I can get to 84, walking around, enjoying life, I'll be pretty happy. Anything after that will sort of be bonus. So can I get another 20 years out of this body? Now, I didn't necessarily have to go to my provider. I could have went to the internet. What I understand is that 7% of searches on the internet right now are health-related inquiries. Over 1 billion health-related inquiries every day on Google. There are an estimated 20 to 100,000 health-related websites, thousands of specific topics that we can look at. There are, astonishing to me, 350,000 digital health applications available to me as a person to guide me onto the healthy path to get to where I want to go. There are even, clinically, as I understand it, 234 unique clinical indicators that my doctor can use, I can use as an indicator of whether I'm going to pull off having a healthy body for the next 20 years. Now, I say this is there's a lot of noise out there on the internet. Do I have too much cholesterol? Is it saturated fats? Am I not walking enough, walking too much? There's so many things that influence whether I'm going to get there. I simplified it. I just went into my primary care provider and said, look, here's the thing. I want the one, the two, or the three things that is going to get me that 20 years. Give me something to focus in on. I can't work 1,000 things. I need to work a few things. And so far, she's given me two. So I'm going in this next week for the third, but I have two measures so far as to whether I'm going to get on to that next 20 years. So the similar story in patient safety world, healthcare is very complex. And if we were to go, if a CEO of a hospital was to go to the patient safety officer and said, look, tell me the 2, the 3, or the 4 things I can do to cut medication risk by 50%. If we just looked at medication safety, said, look, we got wrong patient, drug, dose, route, and time, how do we cut that in half? All right, and what does it take? In system design and in behavioral choices that we make along the way. Because it's not simply the air piece of it, but it's the systems and choices that lead to medication safety events. Wrong patient, drug, dose, route, and time. Likewise, infection control, CAUTIs, CLABSIs, pneumonias, surgical site infections. What are the 2, 3, or 4 things I could do differently that would reduce those events by 50%? I had an expectation when I went to the doctor that I want to get 20 years. Matter of fact, not only my expectation, it was my wife's expectation, it was my children's expectation. The dad, and by the way, they thought 20 years was low. They said, you should be thinking 30 or 40. I was pretty happy. If I could get 20 good years out of this, hobbling around, doing the things that I want to do, I'll be pretty darn happy. I'll feel like I sort of won the game if I can get 20 more years of good, healthy body. And so what should a leader in an institution expect? What can we get in terms of improvements of patient safety along the way? Can a few new behaviors get you a 50% reduction across these 10 outcomes? What are the behaviors that we need to do? Is that you could give me 1,000 and say there's 1,000 things you can do. If you do all these, you get to that 50%. That's probably going to be unworkable. Are there small system changes? Are there behavioral changes that we can focus in on that will give me that 50% reduction? We told the Saudi Patient Safety Center we could get them there with guarantees. We said it is a very achievable thing to move. In the case of Saudi Arabia, what is this, 500 hospitals? Move 500 hospitals to get to that 50% goal of reducing medication safety events and infection control or infection events, generally through the focus of a few key behaviors. It would be through a national culture improvement program and the application of some very specific tools. I'm going to talk about those as we go through this. Probabilistic risk modeling being one of those. I'm going to show you some examples of where we've done just this and how you can do that. Now, where do we start? We at ECRI, the Just Culture company, by the way, got acquired by ECRI over a year ago. And together we have sort of formulated variants of this particular formula. But the simplification is systems plus choices equals outcomes. What we can control are the systems that we design around our employees. And what we can help shape are the choices that those employees, whether they be managerial or staff, we can shape the choices of team members to be more optimal so that the systems that we design around them in combination with the choices that they make ultimately help us produce better outcomes. The basic idea is good, reliable systems plus good choices will help me get good outcomes. We can design better systems, and then we can help people make better choices in that. The choices piece, the gray in the middle there, the choices piece, for me is really what we would call culture. It is the choices that we make along the way that ultimately influence the outcomes that we get. This formula is less about human error. And Dr. Anna said it's not simply the error piece. As a matter of fact, the systems and choices shape the error. So it's not so much about error. It's less about the fact that I will do things I never intended to do. It's more about the quality of the systems we design and the choices we make along the way that ultimately help us produce good outcomes. And can a few narrowly identified set of choices ultimately get me very impactful results? I'm going to speak a moment about just culture and how just culture becomes a bit of an answer to this, but perhaps an incomplete answer to this. When we teach just culture, we teach a very specific model of it. We talk about human error, the things I never intended to do. We make mistakes as human beings. We look right back on it and say, I didn't intend to do that. I didn't intend to pull the wrong medication off the shelf. I didn't intend to misread the x-ray. There's a lot of things that we do that will fall into the bucket of unintended conduct, things where I should have been able to see it, but for some reason in that moment, I didn't do it. On the road, it could be not seeing a stop sign. In the workplace, it can be not picking up something that was dangerous and seeing it. It's human error. It's unintended conduct. The other end of the spectrum are the more highly culpable events, knowingly causing harm or purpose to cause harm, where we would say at this level, pretty clearly, we're going to say sanction would occur. So there's the highly culpable, more intentional end of the spectrum, where it is, I just know that harm is certain to occur, and I set out with express goal of causing harm. There'll be knowledge and purpose. In the middle are two additional behaviors we need to talk about. One is reckless behavior. Reckless behavior, the British will call this gross negligence. We call it recklessness. It is conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. I saw it as dangerous, but I proceeded in the face of that danger. So it gets into my theater of consciousness. I see it as dangerous, and I choose to proceed in the face of what is unjustifiably dangerous. Unjustifiable is key there, because we all take risks in life. Healthcare providers take risks, but we take calculated risks in order to produce the results that we want. Recklessness is unjustifiable risks of harm that are both substantial and unjustifiable, and then I would consciously disregard those. The last behavior, and perhaps the most important in this discussion, is the notion of at-risk behavior. At-risk behavior is different than human error. It's a choice. Human errors I don't choose. They just sort of happen to me. At-risk behavior is a choice where risk is not recognized or is mistakenly believed to be justified. We will call this, a lot of people will refer to at-risk behavior as behavioral drift. We start drifting away from what we know is the right thing to do. We live in a very complex system. We have multiple competing priorities, and we start cutting corners, thinking we're in a safe place. This applies in the workplace, applies in my personal life, getting that extra 20 years out of my body. Have I engaged in much at-risk behavior over my lifetime? The answer is yes. Now, the issue is how do I steer myself onto the safe path? And really, what is the safe path for getting that 20 years for me? What is the safe path within an organization to producing better results around medication errors, better results around healthcare acquired infections, or any adverse patient safety outcome that we're looking at? So in our basic model, we say, look, accept the error. See, we could write an HR policy that makes all of these against the rules. And many policies, when we first get into an organization, most of the HR policies make human error all the way through purpose to cause harm against the rules. If you violate a safety rule, you will be disciplined. Well, I could inadvertently violate a safety rule. That would be human error. I could start cutting the corner thinking I'm in a safe place. That would be at-risk behavior. Or I could just not conform, and it might be up at the level of recklessness. What we say to do in the just culture model is, one, accept that people make mistakes, learn from the mistake, go out categorically, a unilateral commitment to your employees, and say, we will accept human error. We'll accept that you do things you never intended to do. We will learn from them. We will help design better systems. We will help make better choices along the way if choices ultimately led to the error. Accept the fact that people make mistakes. The second one, at-risk behavior, we say to coach. And coaching really is last resort. Ideally, we've designed a system that actually pushes people, incentivizes people naturally to avoid the at-risk behavior. They do what is optimal, and we get the results that we want. But inevitably, human beings will drift into risky places. And we say to coach them. Coaching is not discipline in this model. It is a conversation with another human being about the risks that you see that human being taking. So, and it's to guide them onto a safe path. So we say to accept the at-risk behavior, accept the human error, coach the at-risk behavior, and then leave sanction for reckless knowledge and purpose. All right. And now critical is we say to do all of this independent of the actual outcome. You will see many models of just culture in the world that talk to you about what do you do after harm has occurred. And I'm going to show you a subsequent slide that says, look, most of the work here is what you do before harm has occurred. So it's reacting to human errors, learning from human errors before harm has occurred, learning from about at-risk behaviors and managing at-risk behaviors, getting people back onto the safe path before harm has occurred, and even creating systems that deter reckless knowledge and purpose naturally in the system, so that we're not waiting for harm to occur. We're addressing all these behaviors before harm has occurred. And then ultimately, we try to learn from them. So learn as to what the behavior is, how it occurred, so that we can help design better systems and help people make better choices along the way. So what should happen in implementation of a just culture? We say systems plus choices, or systems plus culture equals outcomes. Well, what should happen as an organization implements just culture, people are raising their hands and saying, look, I made a mistake. Can we learn from this mistake? So we would start to see small, inexpensive changes happen pretty fast. We're creating a stronger learning culture that allows us to be more nimble as an organization, and we're able to make corrective changes along the way. Large and expensive changes they happen slowly. You're not going to bring robots into the basement pharmacy. You're probably not going to do unit dose or barcoding at bedside. Changes to health records systems. These are big things, take time, but small inexpensive changes start to happen faster, and we start seeing systems improve. Likewise, the culture. High leverage, low effort change occurs fast. It's spotting at-risk behaviors, having people feel comfortable about reporting the corner that they've cut, where they catch themselves and say, wow, that didn't work. I didn't do two patient identifiers. I walked into a room and luckily I caught it before I gave the medication to the wrong patient. And then I could raise my hand and say, I caught it, but there's something to learn here. The culture piece of this is if there are at-risk behaviors, and there are in every organization, if there are at-risk behaviors, as you roll out Just Culture, those at-risk behaviors should begin to change. And you start to see improvements in outcomes simply because the culture is shifting pretty fast. And that's what you'll see. You'll see improvements to outcome. That's what should happen as an organization rolls out Just Culture. So if you've rolled out Just Culture and said, look, we've done this, where did you get? I would suggest you should probably be able to get 50% reduction in events in the first year to two that you do it. And it's not necessarily because you've invested in big systems. It's because you've worked the culture and you have started to put the squeeze, so to speak, onto at-risk behavior, getting people back onto the safe path. What often happens in practice? What happens in practice is old habits are hard to break. Old habits are hard to break. Sorry, here I'm getting, yes, old habits are hard to break. Deeply rooted severity bias means that Just Culture work occurs post-harm on single events and single employees. When you ask somebody, do we have a Just Culture? Most people and most managers will say, well, how do I know that? Well, I know that because after harm has occurred, we're dealing with it in a more just way. It's sort of, when you show up in front of the court, will that court be just? Most people see Just Culture through that lens. Systemic at-risk behaviors, though, are socialized to remain as long as the undesirable outcome rates remain sort of tolerable to the organization. So you will see systemic at-risk behaviors. If you have implemented Just Culture and you're using Just Culture post-event, 2 years in, 5 years in, 10 years in, you may say, look, we're seeing the same behaviors. Nurses not confirming drugs coming out of the dispensing system. Doctors not washing hands going into the patient room. You'll see a lot of the same at-risk behaviors 2 years, 5 years, 10 years in, because Just Culture has turned into what do we do after harm has occurred, and has turned a blind eye to some extent to what do we do before harm has occurred. Organizations will feel more just, but the systemic issues remain unaddressed. So we have a Just Culture, but we still have that underlying presence of at-risk behavior. At-risk behaviors that we should have, and while we were implementing Just Culture, gotten team members back onto the safe path. But ultimately, the bad implementation of Just Culture it is our attention turns after an event has occurred, after harm has occurred. That's when we start working the Just Culture piece of it. The focus of Just Culture, where should it be? Well, there's a piece after harm. When we're pulled in front of the judge, we want the administration of justice, the just part here, to be just. But it's 1% of our work. The after harm piece is 1% of work. We're going to ask then, how do we change systems? How do we change behaviors? And as you stand in judgment of me involved in the event, you'll say, how do I adjust David's behaviors to produce better outcomes? Before harm is where 99% of your time should be. How do we change systems and behaviors to produce better outcomes before the bad outcome occurs, before we've had harm? And that's where 99% of the work is. And that's what we're going to talk about as we go through this, is how to manage specifically a small number of key behaviors that will help us produce dramatically better results. But it's all happening before harm has occurred. The whole idea of chasing zero harm is we don't even need a process, or theoretically won't need a process for what we do after harm has occurred, because we're not causing harm. We're dealing with it all before harm has occurred. And that's where we talk about, in our model of justice, a duty and breach-based system of justice. If I have a duty to wash hands, if I have a duty to do 2 patient identifiers, we stand in judgment of my conduct if I don't fulfill that duty, independent of the bad outcome that's occurred. In fact, we'll say if there is a review panel, like a physician review panel, peer review panel, you would conceptually see them being blind to the actual outcome. What happened to the patient, we might ask? Does it really matter in the administration of justice as we're thinking about this in a peer review? And we've had a physician, chief medical officer at a hospital in Pennsylvania say, we will judge, this is what he said to his team, he said, we will judge the quality of your choices, not the triumph or the tragedy that those choices produce. We will judge the quality of your choices, not the triumph or the tragedy those choices produce. It's pushing justice ahead of harm, because the just thing for the patient is to do our work to prevent the harm in the first place. When harm occurs, we do exactly what we would have done had there been no harm. So it is work at the before harm piece, put the systems in place to deal with systems, to modify systems, to improve systems and behaviors before harm has occurred. So I'm going to talk about a concept we call key behaviors. And key behaviors are focusing in on that narrow set that will be high leverage. Admittedly, a guy who was looking for 20 more years out of the body I showed you, the picture, I couldn't go to the internet to find it. There were too many things on the internet. I needed to go to an expert, and that expert became my primary care provider. I said to my primary care provider, test how you need to test, send me to specialists if you need to send me to specialists, but I want to come back together with you, and I want you to tell me the 1, the 2, the 3, or the 4 things I need to do that will ultimately help me get to 20 more years out of this body. If it's 100 things, I'm in trouble, because I ain't going to be able to do 100 things. All right, I'm already finding 2, 3, or 4 is difficult. I need the support of my family. I need the system around me to do the things that I need to do. Even that notion like walking, 10,000 steps a day, that requires a little bit of cultural support from family. It requires a bit of work from everybody around me to give me the margin to pull off those 10,000 steps, to walk the level I need to walk. Key behaviors has a sort of a similar trajectory. Healthcare systems, complexity grows over time. We all know this in the patient safety space. When we go in after an event has occurred, rarely do we start with what can we remove to produce better outcomes. What can we get out of the way of clinicians dedicated to the safety, and the well-being of the patients? What can we remove off of your plate? What obstacles can we take out of your way to get you to better results? Often in the patient safety space, and this is true in the industrial safety space, the aviation safety space, the power generation safety space, we add things. We just keep growing with complexity. We add more and more demands. If there's a safety problem, we add another safety rule, we add another Band-Aid to the system, and ultimately systems grow complex over time, which then puts employees caught in the middle of increasingly, values that are increasingly in tension with each other. That ultimately leads providers inevitably to adopt local variations in practice. And in this key behaviors discussion, variations in practice is key. It is, you ultimately find out for one task, we will have 10 people have 10 different ways of pulling that off. And ultimately 10 different levels of reliability in producing the result we're trying to produce. Variations in practice become the threat. Now, variations in practice aren't bad if all the 10 paths have equal reliability. Variations in practice aren't inherently bad, but they become bad as we misjudge risks around us. We start cutting corners thinking we're in a safe place. We start with new variations in practice that ultimately are more risky. Is our belief that systems need to be reassessed, and I'm going to show you some examples of this as we go through this here today. But it starts with reassessing systems. If you just work your way backwards, and I'll show you this in a couple of examples, but the first place to start is going into a process, and I'm going to take you through one around specimen labeling, and where phlebotomists and nurses have to go, or phlebotomists have to go to the med-surg floor and do a blood draw, and we want to reassess. We want to reduce the likelihood that they're going to mislabel a specimen, and I'm going to show you some data on this. So the first place to start is, okay, well, what is minimally required to produce the result? And what is the result of a phlebotomist? The result of a phlebotomist is I've gone up to the floor, I have drawn blood from 20 patients, whatever the number is, and I've got that back to the lab in time, so that the lab can process those results and they can be used for morning rounds when the doctors are rounding on the patients. They've got up-to-date results. So we have a system that says we're going to go out and we're going to draw blood with patients. The outcome is the drawn blood's in the vial, taken back to the lab. What is minimally required to produce those outcomes? This is just the work. We hire, people with MBAs, Masters in Business Administrations. They would say, we hire people to produce widgets. Widgets is that term of like a universal thing where everybody is hired to produce something. What is it you're hired to produce, and what is minimally required to produce that outcome? Secondly, what is minimally necessary to minimize the risk of the wrong outcome? So we hired you to produce a result, but we don't want to produce the wrong result. And in the patient safety space, the wrong result would be a mislabeled specimen, a wrong drug delivered, an infection in the surgical site. What is minimally necessary to minimize the risk of the wrong outcome? Again, I use the word minimally necessary because it's not about piling on 1,000 recommendations like you could pile on me to say, David, the way you're going to get 20 more years is here's the 1,000 things that you need to do. It is what do I minimally need to do to get to that 20 years? Because I have a lot I want to do in life. A lot I want to do with my family, a lot I want to do professionally, but I want to make sure I get in the time to take care of my body to give me that extra 20 years. What does a team member minimally have to do to minimize the risk of the wrong outcome? Third, what is minimally necessary to protect attendant values? Those values could be employee safety, could be privacy of the patient, could be financial stewardship. Any value that you hold could be environmental stewardship. But we will put work into the process. We will put defenses into barriers, safety nets into the process to protect attendant values. So, but we start with what is minimally necessary to do the work we hired you to do, what is minimally necessary to minimize the risk of the wrong outcome, and then what is minimally necessary to protect attendant values. Ultimately, we're asking the question, you've got a job to do, you're producing something. What are the defenses that we can put into that system around you that have the ability to cut across most of the potential failure paths? So if you are a nurse and you are at bedside and we have the opportunity to scan the medication at bedside, that scanning of that medication cuts across a lot of failure paths. It allows us to catch wrong patient, allows us to catch wrong drug, So there's a lot of things that we can catch where we put a defense in place. What's the minimal set of defenses that can cut across most of the failure paths in the process? How do we be minimally, this is like minimally invasive surgery. It's not how much can we, in the interest of safety, can we pile on to the human being. It's how little can we put on them to produce the results that we want to produce. The first, I'm going to talk about 3 key behaviors programs. First one I'm going to start is with in aviation. I didn't say this actually when I first started this. I actually spent time in the 1990s in Jeddah with Saudia and Saudi Royal Flight, taking care of the King's aircraft. I was a Boeing engineer and had the privilege of doing support with Saudia. We did some work with Delta Airlines, formerly Northwest Airlines at the time, 1998, in aircraft hangar maintenance. So this is where you bring a 747, a DC-10, big airplanes, Airbus airplanes into the hangar to do heavy maintenance. They may be there for a month. They may have the equivalent of 200 people working on that airplane. This is surgery. This is heavy surgery for airplanes. And I don't know if it's published data, but what I could tell you is the most unreliable airplane is the airplane that just came out of heavy maintenance, because there's so many human beings. Even though we're fixing a lot on the airplane, it just came out of maintenance, just like coming out of surgery. While it came out of maintenance, there's so many human hands in there, so much potential for human mistakes that it takes an airline, a few weeks to get that airplane back to where it should really be in terms of reliability, low levels of reliability. Also, what I can tell you is arguably the least safe airplane is the one that just came out of major check, because there's so much opportunity for human beings to make mistakes along the way. It is very, those 1,000 recommendations, they apply inside a hangar. A Boeing 767 has 1 million unique maintenance procedures attached to it. It's rich in procedure. What we find is that 50% of errors where we don't install something properly, we forget to install something. 50% of them, this comes from our data that Delta and Northwest put out at the time. 50% of the errors involved a knowing violation of federal aviation regulations. I say knowing violations. If you deviate from the manufacturer's instructions, Boeing's instructions as to how to, in that 1 million pages of procedure, if you deviate from them, it's and you knowingly do it, it's a knowing violation of the federal aviation regulations, because the rules say you have to do it as the manufacturer spells out in their maintenance manuals. So there's a lot of at-risk behavior, 50%. We did analysis with technicians on the floor, trying to identify what behaviors could cut across all the failure paths that we could get wrong to avoid a misinstalled or a not installed, improperly installed part. When we've taken that airplane apart and put it back together, we want to make sure it gets all back together in the right way. We identified 7 key behaviors, I'll show you on the right, 7 key behaviors in heavy maintenance that would reduce the risk of an aircraft accident. And these are 1 in 50-year events as it is. These are very rare events. But we set out to reduce the risk of an aircraft accident out of the hangar by 93%, and believe by data analysis that we got there. But there were 7 specific behaviors. Some of these, half of them, were new behaviors that we identified as having the ability to cross-cut, to go across a whole bunch of different failure paths so that we could boil it down to 7. This is like my doctor saying, look, here's your 3 things. Even though there is 1 million things you can do, here's 7 things in the case of Delta Airlines, 7 things that each and every time you do maintenance, you do. And stick to those, hold strong to those, make those part of your professional standard. All right. 7 behaviors. It doesn't fix every at-risk behavior. It doesn't fix everything that might not go according to the letter of the maintenance procedure. But it does say for these 7, every time you do maintenance, stick to these 7. And Delta Airlines did this by partnering with its labor groups and ultimately having even the labor union at this time go out and teach the teams and say, here's the 7 things we do to make sure our families, when they fly on these airplanes, to make sure our families are as safe as they can be. That was our first key behaviors program. And there are airlines in the US still doing key behaviors, other airlines that took the message that Delta had learned and said, let's focus in on these 7. Let's talk about healthcare. I'm going to talk about mislabeled specimens at Palmetto Richland Hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. I talked a little bit about this, but they had a problem with mislabeled specimens. This is a just culture work. We did it with the South Carolina Hospital Association. The Hospital Association said, look, we want to go down this just culture path, but we need to convince our hospitals that it's worth the work. We're going to do work to do this. Is it worth the work? So they said, look, we have at Palmetto Richland, I can say the data because they shared it. There's a website about it, that specifically about this initiative. But they had mislabeled specimens that were happening 50 times a month. Every month there would be 50 vials of blood that would show up in the lab that had the wrong patient's label on those blood. And what Palmetto Richland did is they said, look, this is causing some frustration. The chief nursing officer was frustrated by it. And she went out and said, look, if you can't get the label properly on, the proper patient label on the vial, you will be subject to disciplinary action, up to including termination. So they put out the threat that a mislabeled specimen could lead to sanction by the hospital. And did it get them somewhere? And the answer is yes. They went from 50 a month down to 14. But that's where they stopped. They couldn't get past that average rate of 14. And that's where we said, look, we can do this. A colleague of mine, we spent 1 week on site. We partnered with 2 phlebotomists and 2 nurses, and we did an analysis of how mislabeled specimens occur. We identified what was necessary to label. We identified what was minimally necessary to protect patient safety in a quantifiable way. But what we found when we got on site at Palmetto Richland is that every nurse and phlebotomist had their own variation practice. We couldn't find one phlebotomist or nurse at the time that actually followed the procedure. Everybody had their own strategy for producing a labeled blood. There was pressure to get that blood back to the lab. They had that production goal, and we had to work with them to see, what is it they were doing compared to what the rule book said. And ultimately, nobody was following the rule book, because the rule book said you got to confirm name, date of birth, a medical record number, and account number on each vial of blood that you drew, and that became pretty onerous. So we added 1 new behavior. And then we cut a lot out of the task. We cut the size of the task of confirming patient by 50%. We got rid of the medical record number and the whole account number check. We ultimately said there's 1 behavior we have to focus in on. We called it the final check. It was to check to match the last 3 digits of the medical record on the vial against the armband on the patient. And you would do this out loud. You'd read out loud the numbers, all right? You'd read out 547, 547 from armband to a label on the blood. And that would be your defense. That would be the confirmation. So we added 1 behavior and we eliminated a couple of behavioral expectations. We made the task simpler. but we added in a key behavior that said each and every time you do this, you have to do this behavior. Now, this is the essence of key behaviors. It wasn't, we were able to convince the chief nursing officer to roll back the disciplinary threat, to go from we're going to punish you if you mislabel a specimen to we're not going to punish you for a mislabeled specimen, but we're going to hold you accountable to doing the key behavior. And we're going to watch, we're going to monitor, we're going to make sure that each and every time you draw blood, you out loud do the final check by matching the last 3 digits of the medical record number against the vial and the armband, and to see that they match. The patient will hear you doing it, your peers can hear you doing it, you do it out loud. We create a new professional norm. In 90 days, we had reduced mislabeled specimens by 93%. This picture on the right was just one of the posters that they used internally about just the 3 numbers, and it's a little hard to see on the right, but after the 962 are 3 numbers in red. But those 3 numbers, it's read out loud the last 3 numbers off of the armband and off of the vial of blood. We went in saying we would cut it by 90% in 90 days. That was our pitch to South Carolina. We actually said we'd do it for free. All you have to do is publish. If you don't publish, then you'll pay a consulting fee. But publish so that the other hospitals in South Carolina and anywhere in the world could learn from what happened here. But publish, whether we made the target or mismade the target, we want you to publish. So we went in saying we'll deliver 90% in 90 days. We got 93%. And it was one behavior. That's the key issue of key behaviors. It wasn't, and I think Dr. Anas said this, is punishing people into safer outcomes. Doesn't work. We took the punishment off the table and said, we're not going to punish you for the outcome. Really, the mislabeled specimen as outcome is really owned by the hospital as a whole. This is what we own. Now, our employees, it's the quality of their choices. Just as I talked about earlier, the chief medical officer at the hospital saying, we'll judge the quality of your choices, not the triumph of the tragedy that those choices produce. So in this particular case, it was, here's the quality of the choice we need. Every time you draw blood, you do the final check, which includes out loud saying 547, 547 confirmed. And that becomes the key piece, the key behavior around specimen labeling. And we got to 93% in 90 days. One more example. We worked with the New York State Hospital Association of New York State is what's called, Haney's. And we worked with one hospital in Metropolitan Hospital in the Upper East Side of New York City, just east of Central Park. And they had issues with sepsis. It was the onset of sepsis to septic shock. They had been working for a couple of years to try to be better at first detection of sepsis not leading to septic shock, and how could they improve the numbers? And they were in the range of low 20% of the patients who got sepsis ultimately moved into septic shock. We did analysis 1 week on site, 2 of us, similar to what we did in South Carolina. We identified one specific behavior that was central to producing a better result. And our goal was, let's go after 90%. Can we do this? What we typically do is say, look, if we're gonna go reinvest in a better patient safety process, and this would be my general recommendation, is how much better do you want to be? Well, target 90%. If you get 50, celebrate, but target 90. Just start, like, each time we do an order of magnitude better than what we used to do, and go after 90%. We went after 90%. Ultimately, we identified a standing order. Standing orders are tough in New York State because at the time, you really need a physician to do an order each and every time. But this was a standing order for lactic acid test if 2 of the 4 SIRS criteria were met. So the SIRS criteria are those 4 indicators that there might be a possibility this patient has sepsis. The lactic acid test allows us to have an early indicator that this patient is going to be septic. So we identified one key behavior, and you can see, actually I'll show the results on the right-hand side. For 2 years, they had been working this. They dropped it from the 40% range down to 23%. We identified one behavior, which was that standing order for the lactic acid test, where a nurse could initiate a lactic acid test as soon as they saw 2 of the 4 SIRS criteria were met. We took the progression of sepsis to septic shock from 23% down to 1.5%. That's the drop. Now, you're going to say, well, there seems to be sort of a magical piece to this, is how did you know it was that behavior? And it's the same of me going to my doctor. It's like, look, there's 1,000 things the internet's telling me I can do. Do I do olive oil? Do I do corn oil? Do I exercise too much, too little? Ultimately, I'm trying to get this down to 2, 3, or 4 things that you can tell me that will be very high leverage for me. And this is my doctor saying, Dave, I'll run tests on you so I can personalize what those 3 are for you. And again, she's given me 2 of the 3 so far that I can focus in on. And that becomes a lot for me because I gotta make time and space for those specific key behaviors that get me to where I want to go. Same true for in the healthcare setting is can you find the behaviors that are going to be the most influential behaviors that will actually produce the results that we want to produce. We use sort of a model-based approach, and you can see on the right-hand side, think about this sort of conceptually. We have undesirable outcomes. We are going to have, as part of an undesirable outcome, a human error. Somewhere in the process, somebody's going to select the wrong thing. Somebody's going to interpret the wrong thing. Typically, we don't have patient safety events, and at least there's one human error. We're not talking about intending to cause harm to patients. We're talking about what for you and I would normally be considered, a patient safety event. Beyond that human error, though, because we tend to focus in on the human error. What did the nurse or the doctor not do that they should have done? And there's quite a focus on the human error piece. And we say, well, look, don't just accept that people make mistakes. Let's learn from the mistake, and then learn ultimately how to produce a better result. So what we look for is, are there behaviors, precursors to error? Are there things that we do behaviorally that increase the likelihood I'm going to make a mistake? And every manager can do this. They can go back and say, what are the mistakes that we make in this department? What are their behavioral precursors to those errors? We saw in assisted living and long-term care facilities where med aides would prepare medications for residents out in the hallway, being subject to high levels of distraction from residents, rather than filling the cup full of pills in a medication prep room. So the behavioral precursor was to do it out on the floor rather than in a more dedicated space. It increased the likelihood that errors would occur, that a nurse would make a mistake in getting the right pills into the right cups. We also look for, next to the human error, is a failed defense. A nurse could go into the wrong patient room. They think they're going to look for Bob in room 212, and they walk into 210, and they're in the wrong room. They're staring at the wrong patient with something in their hand they're going to give to that patient. We, as most places in the world, have the 2 patient identifiers. Ask them, what is your name? What is your date of birth? Those are defenses. They are defenses to catch and correct the initial misidentification of a patient. So while we have human errors that occur, and people are indeed going to misidentify patients, their first moment where they think about, where is this patient? I'm going to go try to find this patient. Those human errors occur. The issue are their behavioral precursors that are high leverage, that if we can fix the behavior, we significantly reduce the error. Could we reduce the error by 90%? Or are there defenses, failed defenses, that are not working as they should. And the more we get to know our patients, the less and less likelihood there is that we're going to do name and date of birth because we already know who our patient is. So it's making sure that that defense, ask the name, what is your name, what is your date of birth, ultimately become defenses that we need to sure are in place so that we reduce the likelihood of the undesirable outcome. It's not about reducing the error, it's about working the behavioral precursors and the defenses, looking at the behaviors that we do along the way. We use the model-based approach when we do it, and we did for South Carolina, North Carolina, what we did at Northwest Airlines Delta were exactly the same thing. They were model-based approach, mathematical modeling, some patient safety science, behavioral science about how do human beings make decisions, some human factors. But it is ultimately helping frontline managers see the link between specific choices and the outcomes that they produce. It is moving, think of this as moving beyond error. You know, that in the Institute of Medicine in 1999 here in the US published the report To Err is Human. And that is true, to err is human. But it's the choices that we make that are the precursors. It's the choices that remove defenses and safety nets from the system that are actually much more influential because the errors occur at a low rate over time. I will make mistakes along the way. But when I start making choices to not confirm patient ID, to not wash my hands the way I should going into a patient room, those choices become my new behavioral norms. So they're practiced day in and day out as a new variation in practice, where I'm no longer confirming, I'm no longer doing the things I need to do to keep the patient safe. For individuals, again, I've said this throughout this presentation, but for individuals, it's less about human error and outcomes. It's about the quality of the choices that we make along the way. That is the key. It's about the quality of the choices we make along the way. And can a local manager or can a patient safety team be adept at helping to identify the few key behaviors that have the most leverage in the system that can produce the kind of results that you saw in South Carolina around specimen labeling, in New York City around sepsis to septic shock. How do we identify key behaviors? And then ultimately, how do we move people onto them? I want to speak briefly about a hierarchy of controls, or of a hierarchy of behavioral influences. Here. All right. So I'm just moving a little window around there. A hierarchy of behavioral influences. Now, I'm going to talk about three things in a hierarchy here. If we want a human being to do something that we think is supportive of patient safety, supportive of patient privacy, supportive of financial stewardship, you can pick the value. There's a hierarchy, and you can think about this for me in getting my 20 years. The first one is personal conviction, that I believe it's the right thing to do. It's not coming down from leadership to say, hey, everybody has to follow this protocol. This is a belief in the human being that what is being asked to be done is absolutely the right thing to do. Absolutely the right thing to do for themselves, absolutely the right thing to do for the safety of the patient. It becomes the right thing to do. Personal conviction. This is the most desired motivation. The most desired influence is just believing that what I'm doing is the right thing to do. The second one is what my culture expects. It's what my community of peers will support. What do we say as a culture? What are in essence the non-written rules that we have in our culture that dictate the behaviors we engage in? Even if I don't necessarily agree with it, this is what we do as a culture. It becomes the collective group holding each other accountable for the quality of particular choices. even down to how polite we are with each other, how we make reference to each other, respect that we show, and the dignity we show toward each other, comes out of our culture. Is we learn to live in a culture that says, here's expectations we have in our culture. It's beyond personal conviction. It is what my community believes is the right thing to do, and ultimately steers and supports individuals to do those things. The third one, and the least desirable, is I do this to avoid organizational sanction. I do this to avoid punishment. If you go onto any highway here in the US, at least I can say this from our own culture here, is everybody is speeding. If it says 55 miles an hour, people are doing 65 or 70. Our community doesn't support everybody doing 55. It's just not our culture. We don't believe that 55 is where, 56 miles an hour is not unsafe behavior. Now, we're not very supportive of doing 100 miles an hour in a 55 as a culture. And in a school zone, where a school zone says 20 miles an hour, our culture, our community says you do 20. You don't do 40 through a school zone. But to avoid organizational sanction, it is the lowest value that we'd have on sort of the key behavior side. I do it to avoid organizational sanction. Well, then the issue is, well, when is my boss watching? What we know is if you put up a speed limit sign on a road that says 55 miles an hour, drivers don't look at that sign and say, oh my goodness, I have an obligation to my fellow human beings. I have a societal commitment. If my legislator said it's 55 miles an hour, then I have to do 55. It doesn't work that way. Matter of fact, it's my next line here. What doesn't work is rules. Rules by themselves have no influence. We are not rule-based creatures. We are hazard and threat avoiders. So what happens is we park a police car along the side of the road on the highway. And what you will notice is we will zoom past the 55 mile an hour sign, but we will slow up when we see the police officer up ahead. That is the strength of sanction. And we as a culture say, as a last resort, if you don't do what we believe is the right thing to do out of personal conviction, or you don't do it because the community is pushing you to stay on the safe path, we will use sanction as an organization or as a community. We will use sanction as a tool. It is the least desirable of the three. There is a hierarchy. All right. We really want employees to do things because they believe it to be the right thing to do. It becomes part of their own professional code. Secondly, we want them to do it because everybody's adopted that. It becomes what our community dictates as conduct becoming a citizen. And we hold each other accountable to it. And then thirdly, that organizational sanction, that we wrote a rule and said, like the chief nursing officer did in North Carolina or South Carolina, said, if anyone mislabels a specimen, you're going to be punished. By the way, that wasn't a behavioral choice. That was an outcome. And what I would really encourage you to take discipline off the outcomes. There are places like time and attendance, but generally in a patient safety space, what we're looking at is not the result, the triumph or the tragedy, but we're looking at the quality of the choices that led to or do lead to a patient being safe. So there's the hierarchy. The first one is, if we identify a specific behavior that we believe is the right thing to do, how do we socialize it, have every individual on that team believe it's the right thing? All right. Now, this comes with some needed clarity. A small number of behaviors can be individually embraced as the right thing to do and be embraced by the community of providers in the culture. A small number of things. It's going to be hard for me. I'm going back to my original story. It's going to be hard for me to embrace 1,000 things to do to get another 20 years out of my body. All right. Can I embrace 2 or 3 or 4? Yes, I'm looking for 3. Then I'm going to come back with my family and say, family, I need help. I believe these are the right thing to do. I went to an expert, my doctor. She said, these are the 3 things that you need to do. And I need the help of my family, my children, my spouse, my friends to help ensure that I stay on the course, that I do the things I want to do. Because if I don't do the right things, I might not get that 20 years. I want to get the 20 years at least out of this. I'll hopefully get more. My wife wants me to get more. But if I can get 20 years, I'll be pretty darn happy if my body's fully functional for the next 20 years. But it's a small number of behaviors that can be individually embraced as the right thing to do, where we make that personal commitment. I'm going to do these things, and be embraced as the community. In the case of healthcare, the community providers would say, yes, we buy into these as the right thing to do. That's what people call sort of the stickiness, that the behavior has to become sticky. It's got to be now a couple of criteria. It's got to be data driven. You go out to a doctor and say, look, hey, I got a new procedure for you. I got a new behavior I want you to engage in. The first question is going to be, what does the data say? Physicians or scientists, they want to know that there's some data, because we all live in the world of a lot of rules imposed on us without any understanding of where those rules came from. It's got to be data driven. That's why we use risk modeling tools to actually help identify and say, if we do this, this is the 90% that we're going to get. And it should not unnecessarily impede the mission. I say this particularly to those who are on the safety space on the call. It is, we always talk about, safety is job one. Well, we don't hire people to be safe. We don't hire people to protect privacy unless you're the privacy officer. We hire people to do something. And ultimately, people in healthcare get into healthcare because they want to provide care. Many of them say, look, my mission here is to care for patients. And that is my mission. And we don't want to unnecessarily impede that mission, even under the guise of safety. That safety is important. It's a value to be protected along the way. But ultimately, we want to make this easy. If we can minimize what we ask an individual to do to be safe, and we're talking about taking rare events and making them extremely rare. Service every day. All right, the service that a healthcare providers happens from the moment they get in the hospital to the moment they leave the hospital in a day or their clinic. It is a continuous thing. Healthcare is a service organization. It's a service industry, and everybody comes to work to serve. And service is at the center of what we do. And I look at typically more toward a service culture. Now, part of service is I'm going to protect your privacy. I'm going to protect your safety, and I'm going to protect, even financial stewardship. If you're paying for this, is I want to be protective of those values along the way. But it's got to be data driven. If we're going to identify key behaviors, it's got to be data driven and should not unnecessarily impede the mission. Don't get in the way. Try to minimize how much we get in the way. Safety isn't about putting up barriers to care. Safety is about protecting values along the way and making sure that individual providers are empowered to do what they came here to do, which is to care for patients. And ideally, you do those key behaviors, there should be no need for organizational sanction. If I can identify those 3 behaviors, I don't need to be punished into doing the 3 behaviors. There shouldn't be a need. We would say it's poorly designed if we're having to use sanction to get to the key behaviors. The key behaviors, going back up to the top, the hierarchy of behavioral influence, they should be embraced by the first 2. It's the right thing to do, and my community as a whole will support it, and it will become part of our culture, part of our professional standards. What a key behaviors program is not. It's not a compliance program. It's not asking people simply to become compliant, to start following the rules. Actually, in aviation, there's a tactic used by labor groups, unions, where they start working to rule. this is strange, but remember I said 50% of errors involve knowing violations of the federal aviation regulations. There's a lot of workarounds. To get an airplane out the door is a gray world. As soon as you ask employees, this is strange, but in commercial aviation, if you ask every technician to literally follow the rules in front of them, you can shut down an airline. And it's a tactic in negotiations called work to rule. The labor union says, okay, guys, we're going to slow down the operation, if not grind it to a halt, by just following the rules tomorrow. And so the world is more gray than it appears. We'd like to say, yes, there's 500 rules. Everybody's uniformly following the 500. It typically doesn't work that way. Humans adapt to make systems work. We put so much on a provider, so many competing values that ultimately we can't necessarily unwind all of that. But it is cutting through it and saying, look, okay, within that complexity, there are a few small key behaviors that will have high impact that can be embraced by the individuals working it. It's not an observation program. It's not behavior-based safety. It's not watching people into compliance to sort of setting a threat. It's not parking a police car at every alongside the road to make sure everybody slows down out of the fear of punishment. It's not that. And it's not comprehensive. It's targeted. Focus in on the smallest number of key behaviors required to create the desired improvement in outcomes. So it's not going out and say, okay, as of tomorrow, anybody who's not compliant with policy is fired. That's hard because we can't get hand hygiene to be 99.9%. You're not going to get two patient identifiers to be 99.9% tomorrow, most likely. The system works because people adapt in the system to make it work. So we have to be careful. It's a targeted concept to take and say there's very specific limited behaviors that we can put focus in on that people can embrace as new professional standards. Being trained on just culture. For those of you who have done it, for those of you who embraced it, it does not magically improve outcomes. You can say, yes, we have a just culture. Yes, we have an algorithm. We use James Reason's algorithm. We do, whatever tool set you use. It doesn't magically improve outcomes. Being trained on just culture just says I understand the concepts. Ultimately, systems and culture must improve to get to better outcomes. That's the key. We have to design better systems around our employees. We have to help them make better choices. That's the culture. Make better choices in the system to produce the better results. Systems will take time. Systems often take money. The culture piece, though, is managing the behavioral choices of your team and steering them onto, in this case, a few critical behaviors that will have very high leverage. Change to a small number of behaviors can have a large impact. That is the argument. It is, and the argument for me even is, I'm not belaboring it, but it's not 1,000 things to do. 3 things to do are probably going to get me most of that way, that 20 years that I want. Identifying what the small number of behaviors are can have a large impact. Along the way, employees are doing a lot of things that are absolutely right. They're doing the things to care for and take care of their patients. Again, we're cutting through and identifying where a small number of behaviors that can have large impact. It is a culture improvement program. It is getting employees to say, we are adopting, and you do this sort of cyclically, we are adopting a new set of key behaviors that we as a community are going to focus in on to help make a shift in our culture. Culture improvement is behavioral improvement. It is behavioral improvement ahead of harm occurring. That culture improvement could keep people raising their hands and saying, I made a mistake, but also focuses in on the key behaviors piece, which is what are the behaviors that we're going to focus in on that we know are going to help us produce better results. It's minimal in its approach. It's professionalism focused. It's not punishing people into making the right choices. It is having them embrace the key behaviors as the right thing to do. It produces measurable results, and actually what we have suggested to the Saudi Patient Safety Center is for med errors and hospital infections across Saudi Arabia, guaranteed results. the opportunity to do this and to realize that 50% is very real. It's not about, it's not necessarily overhauling systems. It is being able to parse out what are the key behaviors that we need to focus in on and creating a culture improvement through those key behaviors, ultimately to yield up to a 50% reduction in med errors and hospital-acquired infections as examples. All right, with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. It is the quarter past the hour. I know we have time for questions and answers, and I will, Dr. Anas, I will turn it to you to moderate questions. Hopefully I've been watching the chat, so hopefully there's a few that came in.
Thank you very much, Dr. David, for this fantastic presentation and enjoyable presentation that you shared with us. And I really, at the personal level, enjoy the success story that you shared at the level of sepsis and the specimen labeling. And I hope that we can see such as those success stories at the level of Saudi Arabia here. So there is a lot of questions in the Q&A, but if you allow me, I would like you to elaborate more in at least two specific items. You distinguished a lot about or between the human error at risk behavior and reckless conduct, etc. So for many safety officers that attend with us tonight, the at-risk behavior or the shortcut that has become a habit because it saves times is the hardest to manage. So from your experience, Dr. David, how do we shift the hospital culture from totally rewarding those or these shortcuts for efficiency purposes to actively coaching them before an incident occur?
Yeah, Dr. Ernst, that is exactly the issue is there's so much at-risk behavior that you can't shift it overnight. Healthcare is what it is today, and it's so complex. The mission is so noble that we're trying to provide care for patients that it's easy to get caught up in cutting a corner that you don't see essential to your mission of providing care even to the patient, even though it's a critical safety behavior. So, I think and it's not simply, when we talk about the word reckless, we often say, and I say this, recklessness isn't a decree of the leaders. It's not, I decree the following to be reckless. Recklessness is really a reflection in the culture, is where if you take the physician community or nursing community and they say in our professional standards about what we come to work to do, these behaviors become reckless. You just don't do this. And recklessness is a reflection of your culture at that point. It is how do you steer a behavior that is now at risk into being perceived by the team as being reckless. And that is the gift, is how to get them over to viewing this as reckless. Data gets you there, can help you get there, and you need to ultimately create a bit of a movement. And around the specimen mislabeling, we really said in Palmetto Richland that if you don't do the final check, we're going to coach you once. We're going to see perhaps that risk behavior, but if we see that you exhibit a pattern of behavior not to do the final check, those last three digits of the medical record, or if you don't do that as a pattern of behavior, we're going to be going down the disciplinary path, and that is going to be viewed as reckless. It's viewed as reckless because we were able to convince the nurses and the phlebotomists that if you do that behavior, you get the 90+% reduction in harm, that they believe it to be the right thing to do. So it is, cultures do this. If you look at any culture 20 years ago to today, there were things that we may have tolerated 20 years ago, we don't tolerate today. And cultures will move. And some of it is decree by the leaders, where they try to influence it, but it's really shifting the culture as a whole. And that is focusing in on the narrow and ultimately bringing people over to a better path under the belief that it's the right thing to do. And that's the issue, is how do you educate? How do you demonstrate? How do you support your employees in adopting essentially revised professional standards where that at-risk behavior goes away?
Thank you very much for this
Yeah.
full answer and comprehensive answer,
Yeah.
Dr. David. If you allow me, we can take one more question.
Yeah.
So you know that as quality patient safety officers, we are struggle or we like to monitor the work as done through the indicators and metrics available in the hospital. So in the just culture principles or in the just culture journey, so what are the specific leading behavioral metrics that leadership should be tracking to predict and prevent the next adverse event?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I think they really for leadership really owns the outcome. So so if you have we did this kind of work actually up in Sloan Kettering, Memorial Sloan Kettering. We did this work around mislabeled specimens, exactly, or sorry, not retained foreign objects. Exactly what we're talking about doing here around key behaviors. They had a retained foreign object rate about 1 in 15,000 surgeries. We wanted to go to 1 in a million surgeries. So ultimately, what we said to the board and what we said to the leadership was like, look, you own the result. You have to own the result. You have to talk to the patient when we leave a sponge or a retractor in a patient. What employees own is the quality of their choices. One, we're going to build a better system around them. So you bring in things like RFID tag sponges. You put a good system in place, and then you track critical behaviors. And we identified 10 behaviors that we would track, and we would audit compliance. But we knew by analysis that those 10 behaviors are the ones that we're going to take our retained foreign object rate from 1 in 15,000 up to close to, well, the target was to go 1 million surgeries, 50 years between a retained foreign object. We had 10 things to monitor, and then we would go back to the board. And say, here's our compliance rate with the 10 behaviors most critically linked to producing the result we want. So it is creating a surveillance process, whether by observation, whether electronically surveilling, we can do in some cases, like where we look at overrides of pumps and order systems. How often are we doing overrides? We can look at critical behaviors. And then as leaders, we need to be able to explain to leaders, if we do these behaviors, here's the results that we get. And the leaders are going to hold us accountable to delivering on those results. At a managerial level, are we engaging in the behaviors that count? Just like my family's going to say, are you doing the 3 things your doctor told you to do? And we're going to, what are they? And we're going to watch. So it's being accountable to my family. It's like, look, I'm telling you what they are. You got to help me, because eating right, exercise, there's going to be top 3. Same thing inside of hospitals. What are the behaviors? What are the narrow set of behaviors that are really high leverage that we can say to leadership, track these behaviors, because these are the ones that of all the things we do, these are the ones that we need to focus in on now.
That's great. I totally agree with you, Dr. David. I think there is no more questions, and by this we reach to the end of this fantastic session. Thank you very much, Dr. Marks, for challenging us to look past to the what of an incident and focus on why behind the behavior. So I'm sure that we learned today that measurable safety gains do not come from the perfect people, but from the system that is robust enough to coach at-risk behaviors and disciplined enough to design better processes. Dr. Marks, thank you once again for your time and your pioneering work. And to our attendees, thank you for your time, for attending with us, and for the work that you do every day to keep patients safe. See you all, inshallah, in the future sessions. Thank you very much.